Hi, this is Mark Franks with Acumatica. I'm your host for today's episode of Coffee and Code, and I do have my cup of coffee here that actually has real coffee. It's not a prop. I assure you, there's some really good tasting coffee that I brewed this morning with some cream and sugar. And some people would say that's not really coffee, but this is how I start my meal off every morning with a little bit of energy from my sugar to keep me going besides the caffeine. So if you don't mind me taking a little sip here before we get started. Good stuff. So as I said, I wanted to have a session on developer tools, and I thought it would be useful for people to be able to share some of their favorite developer tools that they use. And of course, we have some tools, Acumator, and I have some of our Acumatica employees here to share some of their favorite tools, along with the developer MVPs. To talk about some of the tools that they use as well. So with further ado, I just want to introduce Sergey Nikomarov, who's been managing some of our developer tools internally, but you may know him. He's done a couple presentations along with others inside talking about Acumator in the past, so I invited him, and he has a nice list of tools that he uses. So top of the morning, I guess evening for you, Sergey. If you want to unmute your thing, and I'll let you start off since I know you're prepared to talk about some of your favorite tools. So why don't you share with us some of the tools that you like using?
Yes. Hi, Mark. Hi, everyone. Like Mark already told me, already told you, I'm responsible for Acumatica, for several Acumatica developer tools. I am working in platform department, and I'm also, you can call me somewhat like maintainer for Acuminator currently. I wanted to talk with you about my favorite tools briefly. I wanted to separate it into three parts with discussions between them. So I wanted to start with Visual Studio itself, because in my opinion it is like an ocean liner among developer tools. I wanted to talk about how I use it, and I know that there are other code editors, for example, popular Rider code editor, and also Visual Studio Code development environment. But I believe Visual Studio still is the most popular one. So let me begin with Visual Studio, and in the second part, I will talk more about Acuminator, and finally, in the end, I want to share quickly overview a list of other tools that I use, and maybe Dmitry Naumov also will share something from his side. So first of all, I want to start with Visual Studio 2022. It is the latest one, and I really advise you to switch to the latest version, because it is now 64-bit application, and it really makes a big difference in performance and in memory consumptions, at least in my experience. And if you configure, I can see that Dmitry is somewhat doubtful in this, but you can in the discussion I may give some hints to that may optimize your experience, may improve it. So first of all, I want to speak about general features. Like all of us use code completion, and with IntelliSense, it's a great feature. You can. There is also code snippets feature. It's an old one feature, but I still use it. So if you know about, you can make custom code snippets, and then quickly via IntelliSense, you can quickly insert them into your code. So, for example, I use my own custom, a couple of custom code snippets for frequently used code. So there is also IntelliCode. It was an extension for Visual Studio 2019, I believe, and now it is integrated into the latest Visual Studio. It is a machine learning based code completion. It really is great, and I believe it has something to do with Microsoft GitHub Copilot initiative. So it is trained on a huge data set of code bases, and it is really great in advising you in predicting what you want to type. And if you use Visual Studio 2022 in some small or medium projects, you can see really great advices, really great predictions of what you want to add, especially if you want to, for example, implement something, some commonly used .NET interfaces like iComparable, iEquitable, and also something like to string methods or override some basic methods from object class. Then also there is a customizable color schema. So you can customize almost any color in Visual Studio. And also there are customizable keyboard shortcuts. For example, I frequently use duplication command in Visual Studio, which duplicates the line. Currently the line with the caret in the code editor, and it just duplicates it, and I just attached a keyboard. I just attached a keyboard shortcut to it. So, Mark, I'm not sure. Maybe I can even demonstrate it with something like a live demo quickly.
Sure, why not? Go for it.
Okay, great. So let me just do it. And can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so that's it's easier to show. So here is I'm just typing my keyboard shortcut, and you can see that it duplicated the line. It is really useful when I want to, for example, copy some similar lines of code and then just change something. So about some previous points about the code snippets feature. Here, for example, I can use my code snippet, and you can see it here, and you can, for example, modify it, and you can see that it is changed everywhere in the inserted expression. It is an old feature which was released with Visual Studio, I think, for a while, and it is maybe less less flexible than, for example, there is a similar feature in JetBrains ReSharper, but still it is quite useful for me. So also there is a custom schema here. You can open fonts and colors, and for example, you can set color for everything, even background color, even set up font to be bold, and set up size. So also here is keyboard shortcuts. I also use a custom extension for Visual Studio for documentation. It is called Atominier Pro documentation. You can see it here. And I also added a shortcut to quickly add documentation for API. So Also, in Visual Studio 2022, there is also in all Visual Studios, there is a lot of code diagnostics and refactorings. It's a great platform that allows you to write your own custom diagnostics, and it is really easy to write with the Roslyn framework, and Acumatica really is built on top of it. Also, there are two different ways to add diagnostic to your solution. It is really easy to do this by, for example, you can add a NuGet package with Roslyn analyzers to your project, and these code checks will be applied for all your team members. For example, if you want to enforce some strict analysis, some strict code checking. And also, if you want to use some analyzers just personally, you can install them via Visual Studio extension, for example, by finding the required package in Visual Studio Gallery. Also, in the latest major update of Visual Studio 2022, there is a new feature. You can now display alerts directly in the code editor. So I believe it will work. It will greatly combine with Acumatica, so you will see Acumatica diagnostic messages just here in the code editor. And also, Visual Studio allows you to have project-wide code fixes and refactorings. So, for example, you can select a code fix and apply it to a whole project. I will try to open an example solution. So also there is a great this Roslyn diagnostics can also be used in other code editors like Visual Studio Code or in a Rider code editor, and I believe there is some there are some articles describing how to do it on the internet. Also, there is a great multiple caret feature in Visual Studio. So, for example, if you want to change something simultaneously, you can select a piece of code. You can then push a shortcut, for example, Ctrl plus Alt plus dot. Here I select some operators, and I can just I use multiple carets to do this. So to replace all the operators at once. And also, this feature allows me to very quickly modify big chunks of API that follow some specific naming schema, where I can select some common part of a name and just edit names all at once. Also, Visual Studio is a very customizable code editor, so it allows you to fine-tune it for your needs and enable some extra features. Here, for example, some of my favorite options. Like I said, you can display alerts directly in the code editor. I'm not sure if I have the right versions, because I read it in the latest release notes. But anyway, you can set up your tab row. So you can place pinned document tabs in a separate row. So this is the option for pinned tabs, and this is how it looks. So here it is. You can see you can pin some documents, and you have now two rows instead of one. Also, you can use you can set up your scroll bar to have a map mode, like this one I have. It is also allocated in options. You can set up it differently for each language. For example, for C#, there is scroll bars section, and you can specify it, configure it here. So there is white scroll bar, for example, but be aware that it may affect your performance. So also you can set up advanced code style settings. For example, here in code style, in naming options, I set up my code style checks to check that all private or protected fields are started with underlined and it is not a default Visual Studio setting, but you can configure Visual Studio to do this check, and I believe this naming convention is quite common in .NET. Also, you can set up there are also interesting settings, at least for me, for C#, an advanced setting to place system directive first when sort using command is applied. Also, there is show procedure line separators. It is this line that just separates different methods. You can set Visual Studio to show it if you like. Also, there is an ability to enable navigation to decompiled code sources in Visual Studio. So let me just find it. So yes, here it is, enable navigation to decompiled sources. So this allows you to use decompiler embedded into Visual Studio. And for example, you can use it to quickly look into some API. For example, here I have source code for Acumatica business logic. And here I can just push F12 button and decompile and see the decompiled implementation. Also, you can configure, like I promised, you can some hints about performance. You can configure your code analysis for better Visual Studio performance. It really depends on the machine, so you need to play a bit with this, but you can configure, first of all, you can limit the code analysis scope. For example, if you experience some performance problems, you can limit it to the current document. Or if you have a powerful developer machine, you can check entire solution, but for very big solutions, it will slow down your work. I believe that open documents is a compromise. Also, as you can see, there is an option to display diagnostics inline. So I have a correct version for it, and also you can see that there is an option to perform code analysis in separate process. What does it mean? So before Visual Studio 2022, Visual Studio actually was a 32-bit application. One of the last it was, I believe, the last desktop, big famous desktop application that was still 32-bit, and it resulted in insufficient process memory. So the process memory for Visual Studio was limited, and Microsoft and JetBrains and probably some other companies that developed big Visual Studio extensions, they all were forced to do something with the lack of memory, with tight memory restriction, because I believe 32-bit process has a restriction about 4 gigabytes. And it gets quickly used up when you place all these fancy features like code analysis, some advanced code editor features all into one process. So I believe that JetBrains company implemented for ReSharper out of process code analysis. They do it into a separate process, and Microsoft also implemented out of process code analysis for Roslyn. So when you use Visual Studio 2019, especially the latest version, the latest update, your analysis actually is executed in a separate process, which is started with the start of Visual Studio, and the results are just passed to Visual Studio via interprocess connection. They are serialized and passed. And this is actually not very optimal, because there are some resources spent for serialization, deserialization, and it may be not too stable, at least in my experience. So I advise you to try to disable this option if it is enabled in your Visual Studio 2022, because now it is a 64-bit application. It has enough memory now, so everything can be done directly in memory. So it maybe you won't see some improvements, but at least I advise you to try this. And also I also wanted to say that Visual Studio provides, in my opinion, a very good debugging experience. You can also set up source code. You can set up stepping into source code during debug with symbols servers feature. So, for example, you can look into Visual Studio options into debugging section, and you to set up this step into source code experience, you need to disable just my code. You need to enable .NET Framework source stepping, and also you probably will need to enable source server support, or also enable source link support. I believe it is a technology that also allows you to step into some libraries. Well, it doesn't work in all cases, but also you can step into decompiled resources sometimes, and sometimes it may be useful. Also, you can use this feature together with JetBrains.py decompiler as a symbol server. You can set up it as a symbol server, and here I just wanted to show icon of JetBrains.py. I think I won't start it to save up some time. So also there are other Visual Studio features, like the API itself is very customizable. You can add or remove buttons. You can see that there is customize button, and you can set up some toolbars here, add some commands to toolbars, but I believe that it is not very user friendly, so you need to learn how to use it. But when you learn, you can make you can really deeply customize your experience. Also,
so Sergey, I'm gonna, we're already gone to 10:35, so I just want to kind of move to some other people making comments if they have any questions about some of the things that you've talked about, and if anyone else wants to share some relative to Visual Studio, any specific extensions or some of the things that he's using to customize. Any comments on that before we move into the next section?
Hey, Mark, as soon as Sergey mentioned using Visual Studio 2022 and realizing that he works with Acumatica, the two things came together. And I know in the past I've tried to jump to the newest version of Visual Studios before Acumatica supported it. So, and I also know that one of our developer MVPs had been working on getting set up where we could install an updated version of Acumatica. But where do we stand with the actual Acumatica for 2022 that we can download directly into Visual Studio?
Well, I believe I can answer these questions. Hi, Brian. Good to see you.
Good to see you again, Sergey.
The current situation is like this. You can, as you probably know, Sean Dort greatly helped us. He released support for Visual Studio 2022, and it actually works correctly. We checked it. The one issue with it is that it works only with Visual Studio 2022. But if you use this package with Visual Studio 2022, you should be okay for now. Currently, we are really close to releasing Acumatica version 3.0, which has support for all three Visual Studios, the latest three versions of Visual Studio 2017, 2019, and 2022 in one package.
Yep, great. So Dimitri, I just want to call on you. I know you're nodding, disagreeing a little bit on some of the things. So any thoughts on some of the stuff that Sergey was talking about, or do you have any additional commentary around Visual Studio, things that you use yourself?
Yeah, so first of all, for sure, Visual Studio, I think, is the most powerful code editor there is for C#, and for sure, it is the most powerful debugger tool. So like for debugging experience, I think it's very, very good. And also with the later versions, there is that hot code apply. I'm not sure what the correct name for that is, but if you are just debugging something, you in the latest versions you can just change the code, you press the button, and it applies live to the DLL that you are debugging. Without detaching and reattaching, you just get your new code right away, and you can continue debugging that way. Like, I think that is really, for debugging experience, it's really one of the best things that happened during the past several years. So if you haven't tried it yet, I think you should, because it changed my life, I would say.
Yes, it is a hot reload feature. I believe it is called like this, and it's also support, I believe, for ASP.NET and for at least for I'm not sure about the old .NET framework, maybe for .NET Core. And also for WPF, which is used for desktop development and is used in Acumatica. I just didn't mention it because in my experience, I don't use it a lot because I work on a huge Acumatica solution, and reload for big solutions doesn't work stable. Sometimes works, sometimes no.
Yeah, probably for something like our peaks data DLL, it's not the best idea to use that.
Yes.
And another thing that I wanted to mention actually about Visual Studio, and I think it's like Sergey mentioned that, but I think I need just to emphasize that the code snippets feature that Sergey mentioned is really good for creating data access classes. You know, it's really annoying every time to type all that stuff like public abstract class, blah, 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 derived from IBQL, blah, blah, blah. Then you put the property and like you type it for half a day, right? That is actually where you use the code snippets most effectively. You just, you know, have 5 snippets for int field, for string field, for with pigs db string and pigs db int already incorporated in the code snippet, so you can just, you know, create the fields right away. And also for events, again, for events it may be a little bit cumbersome to type that every time, and you always forget the signature for cache attached, right? I think we've all been there. Like, and you have to look somewhere else to see how to properly type cache attached, what signature it has, what the parameters it has. Yeah, like for that kind of scenario, code snippets, that is a great tool. And also, I've just tried it like last week. I've tried it some time ago, but it wasn't really working well. But I've tried it again last week, and it improved a lot, and it works actually. It actually works fine now. The live share, I'm not sure if you've seen that. Like, if I can share my screen here, I can show you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so here is live share. So like if you are on a call with someone and you are debugging, you know, it is really, really strange to always ask the person to like, could you step into the next method? Could you step over the next? Could you press F10? Could you press F5 to move to the next breakpoint? It's very annoying. I'm not sure if it's like that for you, but I just hate it. But then that live share, it synchronizes your Visual Studio with the Visual Studio of the other person who is debugging. And you can actually, you know, even if you don't have the source code on your machine, you can connect to them, and it loads the text in your editor, and it loads all the like the breakpoints and the current position of the execution. So you can yourself navigate through the code, and you can explain what you are doing instead of asking the person to, well, press F10, press F10, press F11. You can do it yourself, and you can actually see it on your screen while you debug. And you can actually even type in the watch, you can type some things and see the values. So for me, it also changed my life in terms of like debugging with someone, which usually is not very great experience. Like that feature, I think is one of the also best things that happened during the past couple of years. So if you haven't tried it, please do. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, if you're doing a code review too with some of your coworkers, if you manage a team of developers, you can connect and just start going through and explaining things to them as well. So not just as a support, but just working with other developers, you know, to be able to take over their machine in a way, at least their IDE, and step through the code and not ask them to do things. Yeah. Yeah, I wish PowerPoint would do that. So if someone else is running the presentation, you'll have to say next slide. So, yeah, similar thing. So does anyone else have anything they want to share around Visual Studio or extensions that they use with Visual Studio or any tools? I'd love to have some of the developer MVPs on the call share some of that stuff.
One of the tools I use for decompiling mostly is just decompile. So it's similar to .peak. It's a little bit faster to search, and but I don't think it's been maintained recently, so it tends to crash. But it's fast enough that I tend to use it to search through the code. So when I open all the PX DLLs and I'm looking for something in particular, I do a search with just decompile. It's a product by what is it called? Telerik.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's unstable, it crashes and stuff like that, but it's much faster than the others when you search for, let's say, a specific string or message string in all the DLLs. So if you want to do a global search, it's much faster, and there's filters also. You can say I'm looking for method call, or I'm looking for a type that has this name. So it's much faster than the others I've seen. So, and I use it every day. So it's always open. And so when you decompile, the code is not always easy to read. .peek is a bit better, but in terms of searching capabilities, I find just decompile to be a bit faster to find exactly what I'm looking for. Especially when I'm looking, for example, where I want to use PX formula, but I'm not sure how to use it. So I'm going to search where PX formula is used in standard Acumatica. So I right click on the class, and I just, you just right click on it, you do search, and you will find all the examples. But like I said, it will crash on you multiple times a day, but the search is so quick that I use it for searching. Then if you want to really decompile and to read the code, you can use something else once you have found the example you were looking for. So I don't know if others have tried it, just decompile.
Yes, Stephen, it actually works quite well. A lot of time when we also need to, connect to third-party systems in order to pull information from to, it's a great way to actually just glance into the mechanics, and that actually, assists a long way in cutting out weeks of research and development trying to figure out, how you need to communicate with that machine. So we also use it quite a lot. So yeah. From our side, I think there's probably also another a NuGet package attached to all things that we use quite a lot. I think in most of our NDP guys probably know it. I got it from Sergey Nikomarov, a few years ago. And what's great about that attached to all things is, if you're lazy like me and you don't want to go to tools and click debug and then finally get to the attachment. If you've installed that NuGet package, it's almost like running an ASP.NET application. You just click on debug and you click attach to IIS. It also works for a lot of Windows services. So a lot of the time when you also build out Windows services, you can just link to those particular services, and then it will start catching your debugging methods. So if you are connecting to other Windows services and you need to get into your debugging mode, great package to use.
So it's a NuGet package.
Yeah, it's a NuGet package. I don't actually find it on the 2019 anymore, but they definitely on the 2022. I think they probably stopped access for the 2019 going forward at the moment. But you can still download it on an ad hoc base from attached to all things.
What's the actual name? It's a
NuGet
what's
package,
the name? But what is
it?
What's
So it's
the name?
attached to all the things, and it was created. Okay. Yeah, attached to all the things, and it was created by The Bread. That's that's the organization's name.
Right. Cool. Anyone else out there that want to share any of their favorite tools that they use that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I guess I could go. This was mentioned before. ReSharper's very near and dear to my heart. Absolutely love that product. And I assert that all of our team members are actively using it and using the refactoring tools within it. So, I mean, predominantly the refactoring aspects of it are just simply amazing. It often just does a lot of the work for you. It points out stuff like unused code to let you know that, hey, this variable's not used anywhere, or this method's not used anywhere. So like it really helps you clean up classes and whatnot. One of my favorite aspects of it is it introduced spell checking within your code itself. So your commentary that you're writing or your string literals and stuff like that. I'm probably not the only person that's really bad at spelling in this group, because it's common for engineers and whatnot to be horrible at spelling, and I'm the absolute worst. So yeah, I would highly recommend using ReSharper. Another tool that every developer should be using is source control of some sort. GitHub happens to be our favorite. Knowing and understanding GitHub and Git fundamentals should be pivotal to any development process. It's your friend. It is going to help you in the long run, especially if you're working with larger teams. Being able to isolate work from one another through branching and being able to do pull requests really help out with the code review process. Another tool that's very near and dear to my heart is XUnit or NUnit. I think XUnit is preferred for the Acumatica space, but I've used NUnit in the past. Just understanding the fundamentals of just unit testing, and like you don't necessarily have to use the Acumatica unit test framework to do unit testing. Like you should understand unit testing as a fundamental first before you get into Acumatica unit test framework. But unit tests are often your friend, especially with Acumatica, because it helps you code faster. If you're doing test-driven development and you're writing that test first, you could often engage that test to get into your stuff a whole lot quicker. So there are techniques that you can use to code where you don't have to get into the complexities of Acumatica unit test framework or test SDK, just to get to more fundamental aspects of like calling APIs and whatnot, and eliminating your dependencies. But then thereafter, Acumatica unit test framework and test SDK is a good thing. I often write unit tests using the contract-based API as well, because you can actually put those within XUnit classes as well, and it really simplifies stuff. And the best thing about it at the end of the day is you run those regression tests, you're going to be made aware. I've got a lot of experience using unit tests and not using unit tests. Unit tests help preserve your sanity at the end of the day. It's something you should definitely consider using as a tool in your development, and just the whole concept of test-driven development in of itself. Another tool that's near and dear to my heart is Snagit, or any sort of screen capturing tool. Essentially, when I'm communicating with other developers or communicating with anybody really, just having a picture, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and being able to draw a couple arrows quickly and easily and put an annotation on it helps your communication via email and whatnot. And it's a lot easier to parse a image than it is written word. And it also has capabilities of being able to record something. So when you're trying to reproduce, or like we want to emphasize to our support team, like get these recordings or any recording in it as to reproduce bugs and whatnot. Couple other tools. We don't necessarily have these implemented within our extension libraries as of yet, but we do have it relative to our services and supporting DLLs. There's a product that we like to use called Sentry.io. Essentially, that's geared towards like if exceptions or errors happen within your application, it's a logging application so that you can be made aware of stuff going on in the field before it's actually even reported to you. So it is something we want to get into our extension libraries as soon as possible, but we do have it relative to our web services and supporting DLLs that essentially abstract the connectivity to these services, making it ERP agnostic, because we support other ERPs other than Acumatica, and they use the same DLLs, and all of that stuff has Sentry.io engagement within it. Another one that we use relative to those as well is a product called SonarQube. It's a code analysis tool. It sniffs out code smells. If there's any bad code, it's going to let you know. It also analyzes unit tests that you have relative to packages and gives you metrics as to code coverage. Definitely a product that we want to look into in the future for our extension libraries, as it's been super successful relative to our other services. And two other tools that I think are pivotal to developers are learning tools. I particularly like Pluralsight and Udemy. Pretty much you just run a search on a topic that you need to brush up on, and there's courses there. So that's the list of tools that I compiled as to what I like to use.
Yep. Thanks, Robert. Appreciate that.
We've
So
talked
anyone
about
else?
some-
If I
Some
may
pretty
just
high
add a little comment, the attached to all things is not a NuGet extension. It's a Visual Studio extension in the marketplace. So.
Yeah, Seven, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't find
find
it as a
under the
NuGet, so.
Good.
So it's a Visual Studio extension. I just installed it, so.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I just installed it too.
We've talked
Good,
about a
real
lot of
time.
high-tech things, a lot of high-tech add-ons that you can use in Visual Studio. But I'm gonna, being that I developed or learned to write HTML back before we had all the nice code editors for that, it wouldn't be a surprise. I like using something as simple as Notepad++. A lot of times we're going into a Stack Overflow question, and you have to do that formatting. Get your code snippet and make sure that you only have 4 characters at the beginning, or else it's hard to read or it doesn't like to insert. And I do that formatting very quickly inside of Notepad++. But one of the things that I've done as I've evolved as a developer for Acumatica is ASPX pages. I've always handled those inside of the customization project editor. And so as I've gotten more familiar with the ASPX itself, I'll have things that I need to redo in a different screen, or I need to make some changes on how I've done it in one place to do something similar, sometimes even in the same screen, depending on what my dialogues are. And so what I'll do is I'll open up Notepad++, open up the code source for the ASPX page, and copy all that code into a tab of Notepad++. Simply double click at the top to open a new tab, and now I can not lose the original code that I know works as I edit my new code and make the changes that I think I need, and then put that back into a customization project editor and publish and make sure everything looks good. And that way I have all the different versions while I'm working. And so I'll actually have 2, 3, 4 different sets of the progressions of my changes inside of Notepad++, so that I can very easily switch back and forth. And so for me, that's one of the most valuable tools that I use. Is something very, very simple.
If I may, you made me thought of something when you say modifying the screen. There's the include feature that Acumatica is starting to add. So you can include a snippet, for example, for smart panels that you will reuse in multiple screens. You just put an include call to a INC, they call that an INC file, which is basically a smart panel snippet, if you will. So you can include that file. And also when you edit to the customization editor, when you type include blah, 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 it will actually insert the file directly into your XPX. So it's not used a lot by Acumatica, but I figure they're going to start using that a lot to reduce the repetition that we see, especially the smart panel that we see all over the place, that like inserting of serial for allocations and stuff like that. They often look the same. So if I started to use that, it's fabulous, because sometimes you want to put a smart panel, it's just one line of code, include at your file. Although there's a little bit complication sometimes when you want to edit some files, the folder has to be there and it creates some errors, but typically you will figure it out fairly quickly. So look into that, include the mechanism for forms.
An example of that is in the approve workflows, the approvals, not the new UI workflows, but the approvals. They've added the ability to do optional comments for approve and reject. So in the approval process, that is handled, I believe, through the include files, just as you're describing, because the dialogue for that comment is consistent between all of your screens. In my case, I'm not usually reproducing the same thing as I go through. I always need to take more like a code snippet, doing that from Visual Studio, except I'm not working Visual Studio for my SPX. So because I'm doing that through the customization project screen, the Notepad++ stuff works well for me. But yes, if anyone's interested in the include file section, I believe that is, if you kind of deep dive into the approvals, the approve and reject comments are an include file.
Talking about ASPX, I know I've had delay issue when I start my Visual Studio, and the first file that opens is an ASPX. It will freeze there for 15 to 20 seconds. So is there a parameter that I'm missing that would allow me to not be locked on this ASPX files while it seems to be parsing or something like that?
Well, maybe I can help a bit with advice. You can open the ASPX file in some more lightweight editor like Notepad++, which was already mentioned, or in Visual Studio Code, and you can with Visual Studio extension, there is a number of Visual Studio extensions that are called open in something. For example, open in Notepad++ or open in Visual Studio Code. And I have all these extensions installed actually on my machine. So, for example, I can just quickly show you.
So you right-click on the file and you say open it?
Yes, you right-click on a file. Like, let me just select one ASPX file, and here it is, open in Visual Studio Code or open in Notepad++, and here I have
I see.
it open, and also in Visual Studio Code you may find it more convenient.
Much faster. Okay.
Yes. But some features can be disabled for you, for example, code completion.
I can imagine, but sometimes it's you have to wait so much time in Visual Studio to wait for the file to appear and be unlocked, if you will. So.
Yes, I also wanted most of the things I wanted to share. We already mentioned, like the work with Git version control system, for example, and with GitHub, or for example, unit testing. And also I want to show you Test Explorer window just to add to unit tests. So as you can see, it's just a list of unit tests in your solution. And it works with XUnit if you add, and you can run all of them in your solution, or select some of them, and or you can group them by different properties. And if you install, I believe, a NuGet Visual Studio Runner package, at least for XUnit, you can run them directly in Visual Studio.
Are these tests available to us or just to you guys?
I believe for pure for PX objects, they are available to us. Only they are not shipped.
Okay.
Also.
What about the rest? The CR, AR, AP?
It's all
it's part of PX object, right?
Yes, it's part. Actually, tests are different test DLLs. So they are different test projects. They just follow the naming schema of PX objects because they are grouped to work with them more easily. So you can easily find tests, for example, for ER.
Okay, I see. So they're not available, these.
Yes, they are not available, but actually this is a standard for many open source projects. For example, for Acuminate, there are also tests in the repository, unit tests. So you can also clone with Git, you can clone the repository and you can see tests, and you can also use this test explorer window to run all the tests. So it's actually a standard thing. Also, there are nice Git integration, like Git changes window and Git, for example, there is Git repository window with branches and history. And one thing I wanted to show about Visual Studio, one more thing, is that it allows you to run external tools easily. For example, there is, I believe, command to run external tool here in external tools, but you can also specify external design, external editor. For example, for Acumatica reports, you can see RPX files. You can select Open With just by right-clicking on a file. You can select Open With. There is a list of different editors, different designers already provided with Visual Studio, but you can also add your own program. For example, I'm going to find report designer on my computer. Here I have, for example, Acumatica 2022 R1. So here is report designer, here is the file, and no arguments. You can specify name. I add it to a list. I can set it as default for RPX files. Now I run it, and here it is.
Okay, I see.
Well, if anyone has some more things to say about Visual Studio, please say them, or I can also just mention some of extensions that I use.
Looks like the floor is yours still. Go ahead.
Thanks. Okay, so let me return to screen sharing.
Like we say in Canada, the puck is yours.
Yes. So
I'm
basically,
sure Russian will understand the analogy.
Yeah. So basically, I also have read Sergey Marenich's article
Thanks,
about.
Dimitri. I think Dimitri is leaving, so thank you, Dimitri.
Hi. Bye, Dmitry.
Goodbye.
See ya.
So basically, I also have read Sergey Marenich's article about attach to all, but there actually I discovered that there are many attach to all different extensions in Visual Studio Marketplace. So, for example, I installed this extension. Let me just show my installed extensions. Debug Attach Manager. It's a bit different because it allows you to manage processes to which you can attach. So it looks like this window, and I can search for IIS process. I can add it to the processes to which I will need to attach. And then when I push this button in a toolbar, I will just immediately attach to this process when I work. So something like this. Let me cancel it. So also someone mentioned code analysis extensions tools, and Visual Studio is great. It is really customized. It allows you to write, like I said, your own custom diagnostics, and there are many NuGet packages with free diagnostics, free big code analysis packages, like, for example, Roslinator. I believe there are other projects, but as far as I know, Roslinator is quite big, and there are quite many checks. Everything is built on top of Roslin. Also, there are also the support for different programming languages in Visual Studio is also usually implemented with Visual Studio extensions. The support for different frameworks. For example, I use a lot of extensions for Visual Studio extension authors for development of extensions themselves. There is also great ReSharper. It's a huge extension, probably the most popular extension for Visual Studio. It was already mentioned, so I won't stop on it. And I use, of course, I use Acumatica to check it. I also use Atomini Pro documentation. I believe I quickly showed how it works. It generates documentation. For me, XML comments, because I really like to document immediately my public API when I write code. It is very flexible, customizable, and quite clever to generate sensible sentences from method names. Also, there is code alignment extension. I believe I can show it. Here it is for vertical alignment of code. So for example, I can align by equals sign. Like this. For example, I can select text and align. For a lot of assignment statements, it can improve code readability a bit. Also, there is file icons extension. It extends the set of icons familiar to Visual Studio, and icons for some more file formats. Like I said, a lot of extensions for authors of Visual Studio plugins. And there is also live share feature. It really is a great feature. I completely agree with Dmitry on that. There is also much margin extension. It works with a scroll bar. For example, if you select something, some text, it will show you here with purple dots on a scroll bar. So I believe also there is open-in extensions. You can see that there are more plugins because some of Visual Studio own features some of these features are implemented as plugins. Also, there is ResX Manager. It's for .NET ResX files. Really helpful. And I believe I covered most of them. So that's basically it. Also, I wanted to mention that Visual Studio is not the only editor. Still there is Rider from JetBrains. It works. It is similar to ReSharper. It is from the same company. The engine is the same, and I have heard that it is quite performant. So maybe you will find, and it is also cheaper than Visual Studio. So maybe you will find it interesting. And also Acumatica code diagnostics can be used with Rider, but not accumulate other features which are displayed in the user interface. For example, code coloring, because still the code editor is different. Also, there is lightweight Visual Studio Code editor, and I believe with some work you can also use accumulated diagnostics with this editor as well, but also not user interface features. Well, that's basically, I believe that's finally all I have about Visual Studio.
Is that Ryder from JetBrains?
Yes.
Yep. So thank you, Sergey. I appreciate you spending time thinking about all the tools you use and enumerating them, and the other people on the call that have shared tools. Before we go, I just wanted to, because I can keep running over because it's really about providing, sharing your experience and what you think is valuable with others. So I don't want to cut anything short. If there's anything further that someone wants to share, now's a good time. So does anyone else have anything before we close the call on any other tools?
I did think of another one.
Awesome.
PowerShell, that everybody on this call knows that I love PowerShell. You should know PowerShell. There's just so many tips and tricks and stuff in there just to do things quicker and easier. It's a wonderful tool.
Yeah, and great for automating developer tasks. Isn't that true, Robert?
That is true. Yep.
Not
Okay,
that you
so
did,
we'll
not,
wait
not,
for the
not
next.
that you just not that you did a presentation at the summit around that, right?
Yeah, I did do a presentation, and I have a handful of blogs on the topic of PowerShell as well.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're not using PowerShell, if you need any help, Robert's the guy.
Yeah, I'll help you out.
Yeah. So sorry, Stefan, I cut you
I
off.
was going to say you need to do another presentation on that because I didn't quite catch the power of it yet.
Yeah, I should do an hour session at one point, start preparing an outline for getting into the weeds of it, because that was...
Well, you'll have an opportunity in June when we do our virtual developer conference. Maybe you can sign up. Think about it now. It's not till the third week in June, but if I'll hold an hour for you.
Let me process that, because I've been rather inundated with work. I don't know if I'm gonna. Well, we'll see. I'm thinking definitely next summit, doing an hour-long session on PowerShell.
Okay. All
And
right.
having it. So how about that? If I don't do it by DevCon,
Yep.
I'll do it at next summit.
Yeah, likely I'll be announcing and confirming and getting the agenda together the next couple of weeks and announcing that. So you have a good 8 probably 10 days to decide if you want to chew on that for that long.
Okay.
But
No,
yeah,
I've been chewing on it a long time. It's
yeah.
it is something I want to do. It's just I'm not entirely certain I'm going to have the time to pull it together.
Yep, that's fine. So anyone else before I close the call?
Well, Mark, maybe I can very, very quickly just make an overview of tools different from Visual Studio. Very quick.
Okay,
Because
go ahead.
I can speak a lot about different tools. Well, the next tool I frequently use is SQL Server Management Studio to work with MS SQL databases. I believe a lot of people use it, and I actually use 2 versions because in version 18 there is no capability to debug SQL transactions. It was removed. Also, like I told, Git version control system and Visual Studio Code and Notepad++. There is also ngrok tool, a great console tool for simple configuration of network tunnels, secure network tunnels to a local developer instance. It's for us, it's quite useful during the work with mobile version of Acumatica, where we can set up accessible developer instance for mobile version. There is also quite specific tool, Snoop. It is for desktop development, for WPF development. I use it for Acumatica development. Maybe it will be useful for someone. I also sometimes I draw diagrams for technical documentation specifications for documentation, and I use online editors like Draw.io for simple diagrams, plant.uml.com for more advanced UML-like technical diagrams. Also, I use Pixie, a tiny color picker to pick a color of any pixel on your screen. So let me just again really quickly demonstrate how it works. So it is tiny desktop application. Here it is, and you can just get the color of any pixel. It's RGB. Sometimes it's really helpful if you design something. It's if you try to come up with a color, and if you want to pick a right color. Also, I use Nimble Text, really flexible text generator that Dmitry mentions called Snippets. And Nimble Text is even more flexible. So again, I can really quickly demonstrate it. So here you can see that you enter some data, then the data is entered per row, and then you apply some template, some pattern, and then the data is generated, and there are some snippets like snippets for C# properties. For example. So you can get something like that, and you can also use it. For example, there are SQL. You can see that there are snippets for SQL, and you can use it maybe for insert SQL statements. So this is a really flexible tool. I use it when I need to generate a lot of text, a lot of data, a lot of API. And also the final tool is Postman. I don't know if it was presented by, it is a really popular tool for testing REST APIs. You can also test other not REST APIs with it, but I usually use it when I'm testing our REST APIs. I believe Dmitry could have told more about it, but I believe
we had Samuel.
it will.
We had Samuel on the call for a while, so he had his chance to talk about it, but he didn't speak up. So if you're still on the call, the question I would have is: are there any tools like Postman that anyone prefers, or any for doing web services types? Is there any other tools besides Postman? It seems to be the preferred tool that we use internally and what we talk about when we do the presentation around web services.
Well, Mark, I know that I use the JSON formatter, jsonformatter.curiousconcept.com. Not necessarily to test, but a lot of times, and again, in collaboration with different systems, a lot of the times, you'll receive your information unformatted through the string as you debug. And trying to open another, like a Postman or anything else that's quite resource intensive at some points, to try to just format out so you can actually read, the packages that's being passed through now. So what we normally do is we just have JSON formatter on the side. When the message gets received via the debugging, we just copy that whole message out, put it into the JSON formatter, and it just formats the whole thing to actually readable content. So yeah, that's jsonformatter.curiousconcept.com. that we also use. And it's just like a notepad. It's just a quick tool to easily format the JSON package to a readable state rather than trying to read a single line.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. Glad I asked the question. Thanks for sharing that. All right, well, I appreciate everyone's time on and sharing your favorite tools, tips, and tricks on Visual Studio development. Much appreciated. I'll be editing this, and one of the things that I would ask for those of you who shared any tools, if you could send me an email with the name and any links, then I can put it in the post that I do. So what I normally do is I edit this recording. I put a little slide that in the beginning of it, I do a little introduction of what the topic is, and then if there's any links that we can share with others, I put that in the post as well. So people, if they didn't understand, or we didn't give any links, or could understand what the tool exactly was, or just to help them remember, it'd be nice to be able to have those at the end of the post itself, so people can check them out and have reference to those. So if you shared any tools, please send me an email on them, and I'll add them to the post that I do for this episode. So thank you. This has been great. I'm glad that we had a chance to. I think some people were like getting excited, writing things. Oh, that looks like a cool tool. I can use that. So it was good to see that people were writing down some of these as we go. Right, you have a little list. Oh yeah, Brian has big notes and stuff, and I know that
already installed like 5 or 6 of them.
Yes, so just in that, it's been valuable for you, and the fact that you stayed on the call past the time as well. So not everyone could do that, but it's great that you did, and I appreciate it. So until next time, we'll see you, and thank you very much for your contributions here. Have a great day, and if you have a nice cup of coffee, enjoy.
I will. We will.
Thank you, guys. Happy coding.
Thank you.